So our next speaker is Bradley Scott from Xero. He's going to be presenting about Peopleware 2015. Bradley has spent the majority of his career working in fast-growth technology companies. He is currently General Manager of Practice Products at Xero. Recently rated the world's most innovative growth company by Forbes magazine, and was formerly the General Manager of Product Development. Before Xero, Bradley held other product management and development roles in the USA, in NZ, including mobile banking and payments company MCOM, now Fiserv. He's also told me that this is going to be a little bit controversial. So without holding back any longer, Bradley Scott.
Thank you, Russell. Is the mic okay? Can you hear me all right? Seems okay from here. So I'm actually pretty nervous about this talk, largely because I actually enjoyed Lisa's talk so much. And I thought, oh no, I have to follow that. And I'm not nearly going to be as funny, and my drawings aren't nearly as good. Fortunately, I've been able to steal a whole lot of other people's, so that's all right. But the one thing that I think I can achieve is be very controversial. And the great thing about being on stage is I can be as controversial as I like, and you guys can't say anything until Q&A. I'm also going to be doing quite a lot of kind of audience polls, so get your hands ready. And I wanted to start off with a poll that might indicate who I'm going to offend. Can you raise your hand if you work in an HR department? Whew. Oh, there's one person there. Okay, well, maybe not. His hand went down pretty quick. Because I'm definitely going to offend you. Anyone in the room whose organisation does Agile? Okay, yeah, I'm probably going to offend you. Anyone who either makes or sells employee engagement surveys? Cool, all right, well, no HR and no people that sell employment engagement surveys. I might be right. So I wanted to talk about a book that was published a long time ago and some of the concepts in that book and how they apply today. Has anyone read the book Peopleware? There's quite a few people. As soon as I started managing software teams, one of my colleagues gave me this book and said, hey, read this. And it was a very interesting book. Many of the ideas in the book now are principles that are baked into Agile methodology. So it talked about the notion of the people doing the work should be the people that estimate it. There shouldn't be these arbitrary deadlines that management gives people and then they have to work to it. It talked about creating a good environment around your people and that being important. A lot of these constructs and ideas that were talked about in the book are things that we take for granted as part of the Agile methodologies. But this far predates Agile. But I didn't want to talk too much about every bit of what the book said, so much as a premise that was in the very first chapter of the book. And the premise is this, that maybe the major problems of systems work are not so much technological as they are sociological. So the fact that we do Agile as a process, in my view, is a completely wrong way of thinking about the problem. We have to think about the environment that we're creating around our people and whether or not we're creating an environment that will allow people to get things done. And in Peopleware, they went and tried to prove this premise, and they backed it up with some observations of some things that were happening around the time. And it was around an exercise called the coding war games. Between 1984 and 1986, 300 developers from 96 different companies participated in the coding war games. And there was always 2 from each organization. But the 2 people didn't cooperate, they were just independent participants. And every one of those 300 developers was given a problem, and they had to code the solution to that problem. And once they could choose any language they like or any methodology that they wanted to work on, it was completely up to them. But all of that stuff was recorded, what language they were using, how they went about it, what salary they were, how long they'd been in the job. A whole lot of variables were recorded. And what they recorded is how long it took someone to complete this task, and also how many defects they had against a predefined set of acceptance criteria that are common to everyone. And the finding was that there is, the first finding that they talked about in the book, was that there is a massive difference between individual performance. The best performers outperform the worst performers 10 to 1. And I think that's sometimes when you hear the saying, hey, a good coder is sometimes 10 times more productive as an average coder, it must have had the genesis in this book. But even more specifically, the top performers outperform the medium performers by 2.5 times, which is a shitload. The best performers were twice as effective than the worst performing half. Sorry, the best performing half was twice as effective as the worst performing half. So that's pretty stark. And they started to understand what kind of might explain this and what variables you could kind of control out to start to explain this pattern that kept recurring. Nothing that people talked about at the time seemed to explain this. So there was a lot of contention about the language that you used, right? And the language being really important to, choose the right language for the problem, and that'll massively increase your productivity. Adjusting for that seemed to make no difference. Made no difference the experience of the coders at all. Made no difference how much they were getting paid. There was no difference in methodology. So that's why I said, if you're doing Agile and you put your hand up, I might offend you, because if you're doing Agile, it probably doesn't make a fucking lick of difference, because I don't think it's got anything to do with the process itself. The one thing that did make a difference, or that broke this model, is people from the same organization tended to perform alike. The best performers were clustering in some organizations, and the worst performers were clustering in others. Take a moment to think about the implications of that. And in your experience, does that seem to ring true? Have you been in organizations that are multiple times more effective than others? For me, personally, my experience is that yes, you actually can see multiple times differences of an effectiveness when you just shift organizations. And what I want to talk about is that culture, I believe, is the biggest single contributor to agility and effectiveness. And you could think about process all you like, but you may as well think about culture whilst you're doing it, because I think that's the thing that makes a big difference. And I don't think this is extreme thinking, because I'm seeing it more and more in mainstream press and mainstream business thinking about the importance of culture and investing in culture and talking about culture. Has anyone heard or read the document How Netflix Reinvented HR? Far too few of you. It's called the most important document to come out of Silicon Valley. It's a 125-page PowerPoint, lots of bullet points, unfortunately, but it's a very easy read. And it talks about how Netflix culture works. And it is radically different to how a traditional HR team would set up and think about the things that they do. It completely busts it. So please, if you haven't read that, tonight go and download it and read it. It won't take much time. It's a very important document. And mainstream press started to pick up on us. So this is the cover of Harvard Business Review, January, February last year. And it starts to profile great places to work, including Netflix, BlackRock, IDEO, right? Big names that were doing interesting stuff. And I had this complete grinning across my face when I saw this one, sitting on the desk of one of the people in our HR department. And I looked at it and I said, I'm so glad that it's someone other than me that's saying that. And it's even better that it's Harvard Business Review. Because my view is that the way most organizations do HR is broken and outdated and getting in the way. And that's what I want to spend some time talking about. Does anyone agree with me, or if not quite yet? Okay. Why isn't anyone calling that out, saying this is bullshit, why do we keep doing it? But I wanted to give you some examples of things we're doing at Xero that I think are important and that we've learned from, that talk about, that I hope and I think have had a big impact on culture and are trying to make us agile and try to make us effective, but using kind of cultural technologies and cultural innovations, and not so much about, doing agile or a process or a methodology. And the first thing that I want to talk about is incentives. And it's something that I thought we had really broken. And we made some changes, and I think it's a little bit better. And I hope we're going to make some more changes to make it even better. Another poll. Are you in an organization that has some kind of cash bonus, some kind of performance bonus scheme? Okay. Keep your hands up. So raise them back up again. Keep your hands up if you personally are actually subject to that scheme. All right, most of you. Keep your hands up if you've ever been in a situation where you get to the end of it and you go, shit, I don't actually know if this is a relevant metric to measure, or I don't know how to measure it. Okay, there are only a few people that put their hands down, right? Really broken. And we had these problems at Xero as well. And we were moving fast, right? We were doubling every year. It was kind of, Xero's a kind of cray-cray kind of place. And when you move that fast, it's really, really difficult to put these kind of smart, measurable objectives in for an annual period and have them make any sense at the end of the year. And we tried to make it 6 months, and that only made it marginally better. So just stick your hand up again if you personally have some kind of bonus scheme. There was most of you. All right. Put your hand down if you've never been disappointed at the outcome of the end-of-year bonus scheme. Well, there's about maybe a third that put their hands back down. You know, one of the things that these things are supposed to be is an incentive for good performance, right? But it seems to be more often than not, they actually end up being this kind of really resented, kind of disappointing process at the end of the year, that we weren't really sure if it actually had any impact for the other 364 days of the year, where actually people's performance really mattered. And so we had a discussion about it, about are we doing this right? Is the way that our performance scheme set up right? And we looked at some of the writing of Dan Pink and some of the research around his book. So has anyone read Dan Pink's Drive? It's pretty nice. You don't even need to read it. He's got a TEDx talk called, his book's The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. I think that if you Google the surprising science of motivation, you'll find it. It's a really, really good TEDx clip. In fact, I think it might be the most viewed TEDx clip. So it's fantastic. When I watched his clip, I haven't actually read the book, to be honest. It's on my slide, but I haven't read it. But his clip's really, really good. And it really succinctly communicates, and it's had RS Animate sketch over the top of it, so you get a lot of those cool visual cues as well. And so we looked at this, and the thing that Dan Pink kind of proposes in his research and everything around it and in his presentation is, you know, people aren't motivated by money. They're motivated by intrinsic motivators. And he has 3 things that he talks about. Purpose, understanding why I'm doing the work that I'm doing and why it's important. That the people are motivated by that, and if they don't have that, they're not going to be motivated. They're motivated by autonomy. So being able to have a space in which they can figure out the best way of achieving that purpose and not having that dictated to them. And the third thing is mastery, which is the ability to improve and get better and actually have this path towards mastery and getting better. And it wasn't just the theory. There was a whole lot of different case studies and examples and other studies and literature that he cited. And one of the best ones I found was this, right? And the quote is just so damning. It says, once the task calls for even rudimentary cognitive skill, a larger reward lead to poorer performance. And you sit there and you go, yeah, I'm pretty sure I would like my job and the thing that I do to be in the category of needing rudimentary cognitive skill. So that conclusion is fairly damning, and it caused us to really think hard about what we're trying to achieve with these performance bonuses and whether or not they're effective. And where we got to is we just eliminated them for the whole of the product development part. And we said, we have people that come to work and love working at Xero, and they're smart people. And because they're going to get potentially another 10% on their salary in a year's time is not actually motivating them to do the work. So why do we set up this process where potentially at the end of the year we could disappoint them when it's actually not a motivator. We got rid of it right up to the GM level, which unfortunately means that I still do this silly little dance where every 6 months we look at these goals and we say, oh, fuck, they don't make any sense right now. What are we going to do? And it's just completely ridiculous. But I think we can go further because I think there is actually designs for better performance schemes that I hope will take its place. And they all have the notion of the bonus being from your mate and not from the man, right? So it's about having your peers recognize your good work rather than the hierarchy. And this is not completely novel. There are organizations doing this that we have case studies that we can look at. And one of them is from a company called IGN Entertainment. And this is a quote from their person that he had a fancy American title, which essentially means that he was in charge of HR. But it had lots of acronyms in front of it. It's, and the quote that he gave from one of his employees, he said, "It's great that the managers know who's super effective and contributing the most, but quite frankly, we know better, i.e. the rank and file. So let us recognize our peers." And so that's what they did. They have a bonus system where peers can essentially pay other peers for their good work. So to explain how this might work, so consider in this room you all get, we're an organization, right? We call it ABC Corporation. You all get $1,000, but you can't use that $1,000. That $1,000 is completely useless to you unless you give it to someone else in the room. It's only at that point that it becomes real, right? So if you hold on to it, that means the total value of that to the organization is now nothing because you can't do anything with it. You don't get the $1,000, nor does anyone else benefit from it. Now, a lot of these schemes don't have a kind of one-to-one cash, or it might be that there's some kind of credits and you can use those credits on other things, but they all have a similar notion, which is peers recognizing the work of peers. And fortunately for me, making this argument, there's more mainstream kind of thinkers that have, and respected kind of names that have studied this. And so this is a Harvard School working paper, and they looked at a few different examples of these types of schemes. And they said, results suggest that minor adjustment to employee bonuses, shifting the focus from myself and something that I get for my work at the end of the year, to other people can produce measurable benefits for employees and organizations. What are those measurable benefits? Well, in this paper, they talk about a traditional type of bonus system has an ROI of around about 30 cents in a dollar, which is a pretty shit ROI. I know I wouldn't be investing in that. But if you change it so that people actually focus on gifting these rewards or recognizing work in other people, your ROI goes up to be over 100%. So you get more than $1 back in productivity and gains in your organization for every dollar that you put into the scheme. This is a pretty radical, stark difference. And so I'm hoping that this is going to catch on, because it's not just a better way to do bonuses, but allows you to do other things. For one, it actually encourages a really healthy culture around feedback, right? Because suddenly that feedback's really worth something. It's not kind of a hug and a medal, which is valuable in and of itself, but that feedback has real financial benefit to people. But the thing that interests me the most is actually that it could potentially solve another problem, and that is how organizations do salary reviews. Because I have not seen any organization that can do a salary review that does not leave good people kind of a bit disappointed and bitter, right? And to me, when you try your best and you try to look after everyone, but you still have good people feeling bitter and disappointed, that process has got to be reinvented. And I haven't seen anyone nail it yet. Raise your hand if you think the organization that you're in has nailed salary performance reviews, because I want to talk to you. Yes, one man over there. Where do you work? I just need to do that for you. Oh, that was so disappointing. So what I'm hoping about this performance review is it actually can improve that whole discussion at the end of the year. So generally, most organizations have this strange mix of some kind of objective market rate. So there's, a role that you're doing, the market values to a certain degree, and that's a component of what we pay you. But then rolled into that, into the same figure, is some kind of subjective measure of the individual performance of that person. The difficulty is that those things are really hard to separate, and they get conflated, and it also decreases your ability to be completely transparent about how it works to other people. I think if you have an effective mechanism like this, that you could potentially radically change the way that you have salary conversations along the lines like organizations like Buffer do. Does anyone know how Buffer do salaries? Completely transparent. They're like, this is what we pay people. Everyone can look at it inside and outside the organization. So you'll see what the CEO is compensated. You'll see what, if you're doing this kind of work in the organization, this is kind of what we will pay you. And if you want to debate that, let's debate that. Let's bring information into the room about why that isn't the right figure, given the arguments. And we can have a rational discussion about that. The individual performance could be worked out through this, right? So if you all had $1,000, right, that doesn't mean that this process is going to naturally mean that that distribution stays completely consistent over this room. The top performers, the people who are really contributing and making other people's lives easier, will actually get a disproportionate amount of that bonus back. And that could be very lucrative for them. But it's completely done by the wisdom of the people doing the work rather than the man. Right? So you could potentially remove the entire performance-related component and not even have that conversation so much in conjunction with salary, which is where I think it gets difficult. But just have an objective part to salaries and this performance part. So, it's not Xero's policy, it's my thinking and something that I'm trying to eke into the organization. So I'll leave that there for you to think about. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is solve as few problems as you can as management and use the talent and the brains in your organization. So has anyone heard of the radical self-organization squatification that TradeMe's done or TradeMe did do? Yeah, okay. If I get another invite to go to an Agile meetup to listen about how TradeMe did that, I will fucking shoot myself, right? We need more case studies as a country because that one's been done to death. I mean, love the TradeMe folk and they've done some great stuff, and Sandy at Nomad at, but man, that one's been done to death. I'm not going to do it any more to death. I'm going to give you some other case studies that is actually still about self-organization. The first one that I want to talk about is how we used that concept and the idea of self-replicating pods. We call our cross-functional teams pods, so I'll use that term quite a bit. How we used it to solve a scaling dilemma. So last year, Xero was going through a big scale problem. So it was my job when I joined the organization to keep shipping product, but double the capacity of the team. And so I had a kind of a dual role or dual objectives. And it would be the third consecutive year of over 100% growth. And it was starting to get quite hard. So we were at 200 people and we had to go to over 400. And that was part of the objectives. And to do that in a way that wouldn't kill the culture and would actually be effective. So we wouldn't just get the expenses, but none of the additional productivity. So it's a really difficult challenge, right? And it would have baked my noodle had I not been able to use the brains of lots of other people. What we did is we took that objective and that problem to our teams and we said, look, these are the objectives of the organization and this is why we're generally trying to increase our capacity. It's part of our business strategy and our capacity to deliver products. And it's a difficult problem and it comes with all of these risks. And what we're going to do is we're going to give you guys that objective. You are to deliver value to the organization through your backlog, but you are also to grow your pods until you're able to split and create another pod. How you do that is up to you. So they got to choose what the next person or the next skill set that they'd introduce into the pod would be, what timing that would be. They were able to choose what time they would start splitting, how they would split as people, and arrange that all of themselves. And it worked, I think, remarkably effectively. Certainly took a lot of stress out of my plate because I had hundreds of people solving this problem rather than just me and a few others. There was some challenges to that model though. One of them is we have one pipe of talent that comes into the organization. We have one careers website. We have one recruitment funnel. And you can't independently do that for, dozens and dozens of pods. So we had to find a way of taking all of these individual needs from all of these dozens of pods and then aggregating them into a sensible fashion so we could work with our recruitment team on what was needed and in what order. And so what we did is we created a Trello board, and roughly the lists on the Trello board were the types of skills that were typically needed in our pods, in our cross-functional teams. And each pod could then put a card on that board to say, look, the next role that we're after is this type of role. And product managers or the portfolio managers or whoever was the right level could reprioritize if there's any reprioritization to be done. Otherwise, it was a first come, first served basis. And we used this board to talk to recruitment about what we needed. We used this board to put in any kind of notes of, maybe this person would actually be suited to this pod, and have a discussion and transparency between pods. The other thing that we found was that not all pods had all of the skills needed to technically screen some of these people that were specialists. So for example, there wouldn't necessarily be enough people in one pod to really give a good technical interview of a JavaScript developer, right, if they're a senior JavaScript developer. So the pods got together and figured out how they were going to do technical interviews, and everyone went through the same kind of technical panel that was basically the membership was of respected people that could do interviews and good technical screens in a certain discipline. And that was generally phase one of the screening. And if you pass the technical interview, then we looked at the next pod that you are likely to go into based on who was up the top. So for a front-end developer, if they had a senior, then they might go into banking experience. And the next interview would be with that pod, and it would be the cultural screen, the people that you would actually be working with, right? So pretty successful, I thought. Funnily enough, unprompted, it actually started working in reverse. And I don't mean that in a bad way, and that it was undoing the objective that we're trying to have, but what happened without anyone making a suggestion that this was a good idea, except for the pods that were doing it, there was 3 pods that were working on very related work. And they realized that they started to have some dependencies and need to collaborate with the other pods. And they ended up getting together as 3 and talking it through, and they're deciding we would be more effective as 2 pods. And they did it. No one asked them to do it. It's just them self-organizing around the work that they had to do and the dependencies they had on other people, which was awesome. Truly self-arranging teams. And I looked at that and I thought, oh, cool, that's nice. We used this self-organization construct and technique to solve another problem very recently. So I now work in the Auckland office at Xero, and what we were finding is the notion of a stable pod and a stable amount of investment in a given product line was starting to actually run counter to what we were trying to achieve. We had in this portfolio in Auckland quite a huge amount of strategy. I wouldn't say churn because that's the wrong word. We were changing strategies. And as such, there was a huge amount of learning happening really quickly. And the notion of these stable teams and the stable amount of investment in different parts of the portfolio actually meant that sometimes we had skills, valuable people that were idle because they just happened to be in the wrong spot in the ecosystem at the given time. What we also saw was that when we tried to keep the size of investment in each product stable, we ended up having people working on work that wasn't the most important work for the organization at any one time. And so we decided that we needed to kind of relax some of these stable teams and stable product construct and take on a different type of risk. So we all knew that the value of a stable team and people having an understanding of the long-running game in terms of what you're trying to achieve in a given value stream. But it was working against us, and we wanted to relax it. And the other problem that we had was that because this backlog was changing, it actually became a very, very difficult problem and a multivariate problem to try to solve for the product and the technology leaders, right? It was just this massively hard optimization problem that you're trying to solve. And so we basically just gave up. And we didn't quite give up. But we said, you know what, this is exactly a case where you would take this problem to a team and say, look, this is what we're trying to achieve as a company. Here are the constraints. Why don't you help us solve it? So we did that. And we spent a whole day and we took 3 pods, the ones that were working on this area that was the highest priority but couldn't figure out how to get the work done in a relevant time. And then the pods that were clearly not working on backlog that was the highest priority, and we put them all in the room. And we spent the morning explaining, this is what we're trying to do for our customers and what we're trying to do for Xero. And here are the relevant constraints. So we had particularly hard constraints around a few of our deliverables. One of them was that in this particular portfolio, they deal a lot with tax filing. And there's some kind of crazy, parts of the month where accountants just go completely nuts and they do all of their work in 12 months within 3. And we had a product that was relevant for that 3 months. But as we got deeper into that 3 months, the revenue opportunity would disappear within a matter of weeks. And then the other deliverable had to do with New Zealand tax filing. So by the 31st of March, we had to have this thing in market. So we gave them this problem and these constraints, and we said, today is about giving you an opportunity to see if you can solve this problem better than we have. And we've got a plan, like talking to Simon and the Trade Me guys about how they did it. They had the safety net. They said, we've got a plan. We've had a talk with us, within the kind of leadership group about this problem. If it all just completely goes tits up, then we've got a fallback. And we can say, look, don't worry, we've got this. But we would much rather you guys solve this in a better way that we can. So this is a photo from the morning where people were talking about the nature of the work. And once we finished doing the kind of business pitches, we started to look at what the technology dependencies are, and what natural sequence needed to be in the work because of what it was and what order it needed to come. And we learned a couple of things in that morning. One of them was it's really, really important how you pitch your backlog and how clearly you can communicate it. The guy that was most successful, the product owner was most successful, used a comic, which is so relevant given the presentation that we just heard. He had sketched out in A4 pieces of paper different parts of the journey, the user journey, and he would stick it up and he would talk, this is what users trying to achieve, and this is why our product has a gap in it that we need to fill. And it came across so clearly. That was so important. The other thing that we learned is always have the senior technical leaders and the architect kind of personalities in the room at all times. Because we had a situation where they had to go out and do an interview and suddenly people's questions couldn't be answered, so the progress in the room stopped. And what we found is that initially it was the first time that we'd done this. We weren't quite sure about how it was going to pan out, so we're all kind of pretty nervous. But the first bit was quite facilitated. And then we kind of made the call, all right, we need to move away from this strict facilitation. Let's just get crazy, and there'll be 5 minutes of complete chaos. But that's when all the actual real work and self-organization got done. Within 30 minutes, you had teams forming around the work and talking about how they're going to do it. You can kind of see it in this photo. In the background, you've got a team there that's all focusing on what we call the tax management problem. And they're in a circle and they're nutting out how to do it and what skills that they needed and if they've got any gaps. And in the foreground, you've got another group, which is working on a problem that we call the e-sign problem. And very, very quickly that this happened. And then they started to think about, get together their plan, and then they started to test it. So you had people come over and ask questions about, have we been thinking about this and what about this? And we started to figure out where we had some slight gaps. And we spent the rest of the day, trying to iron those out or come up with contingencies. By that afternoon, we had a plan that looked pretty good, and the technology and product leaders felt that we were more than happy to abandon our back pocket plan and let the team's plan reign. And the teams that they came up with and everything that they'd suggested. And we did a little exercise. We did a little 5-finger poll to ask people on a score of 1 to 5, 5 being, that was completely amazing. Why on earth would we ever do this process any other way? To 0 being, what a complete waste of time, never drag me away from my work for a day to do this again. And given it was our first time and the morning was a little bit sketchy at times, we got 3s and 4s, which was pretty damn good. And everyone resolved that we should do this process more often. And so it may very well play a more deliberate part of our quarterly planning, because we do this kind of quarterly checkpointing at 0. So extremely effective way of solving what was a difficult problem. And it completely neutralized some of the anxiety that the teams felt about, there's the stuff that you're talking about behind closed doors that might affect me. Because we completely owned up at that. It was like, we have been talking about you behind closed doors because we've got this difficult problem, and the only way we think we can solve it is shift what people are working on to solve the highest priorities. I would recommend this process or anything like it for similar problems, and I'm completely happy to talk to anyone that wants to talk about what we learned. And we'll probably keep doing it and have more learnings again. Right, I'm going to get some water just for a second. And then I'm going to talk about culture. Who deliberately spends some part of their week working on culture as a thing that you need to work on and do? More than I expected, so that's pretty awesome. One of, I think, the dysfunctions or the risks is people think that culture is one of those things that HR does. It's not. It's your problem to solve as a leader in the organization. It's not something that HR will solve for you, because they won't, because they're all about employee law and all of that kind of transactional stuff. They're actually no good at this in all of my experience. And if they are, tell them to apply for 0, because I'd love to have more of them in the HR team. One of the, I won't focus on the squirrels just yet. One of the things that I saw when I joined 0 is that we had these great cultural ambassadors. They weren't called that. They just happened to be that were in our team, and they were always thinking about culture, and they were always thinking about how do we do induction, like how do we train developers coming into the organization and help they settle in? How do we do team events, and how do we create a cool environment around the office? And these people were excellent, and they were working long hours because they were passionate about this problem, and they were trying to do it in addition to getting the work done, because these people were also the people that have been around the organization the longest and were our good technical leaders. But there was a big strain, right? Because those were exactly the people that we needed to be technical leaders whilst we were scaling to solve the kind of technical leadership, helping get people on board problem. And so a lot of the stuff that they were doing was kind of logistical and repeatable, and it didn't need them to do it. And so I had a chat to them and said, look, I love what you're doing. It's so important. We need more of it. And I want to invest in getting more of it, right? But I also need you to be focusing on the stuff that you are uniquely good at, which is your knowledge of the code base and your technical leadership and seniority, because that's how we're going to scale effectively. And so initially we wrote a job description for a really, really plain and boring sounding role called product team coordinator. This job description was about getting the induction process working, because we're taking so many people into the organization. If we couldn't get them effective quickly, we were going to fail. To train everyone on an ongoing basis and to get that machine working. So we have good new ideas coming into the organization, but we couldn't always rely on that, right? We needed to train our internal people and keep them upskilled. And also team events, so deliberately have things that brought people together, and communication, because communication for us was getting really hard. It's a really hard problem to nut out at any meaningful scale. And that really, really boring role description turned into something awesome. And it's now called the happiness engineer. And it's probably the single most important decision in retrospect that I made in the organization. And I was very lucky to find someone who was perfect for the role that created it and turned it into what it was. And Julie, who's one of the happiness engineers, I went onto her group chat tool. We've got a group chat tool, into her room. And I said, hey, Julie, I'm doing this presentation. Maybe you can give me some images or some ways that I can explain to people how this works, because it's not a role that you'd find anywhere, right? Just by saying happiness engineer doesn't really immediately anchor to people. And I got a barrage of squirrels, which clearly wasn't quite what I was after. But the story is interesting in that it kind of explains the kind of quirky, deliberately kind of engineered quirky culture that we're trying to encourage. So we have hackathon days that we call Ship-Its. There's nothing, I'm not going to talk to you about hackathons. Everyone does them. If you don't, then you should really try them. They're quite cool. Ours are called Ship-It. And leading up to one of our Ship-It days, there's so much talk on Flowdoc, our chat tool, and everything else about Ship-It and arranging teams and what the ideas are going to be. And one of the guys decided to be quite cheeky, and he wrote a little bot. And every time someone mentioned Ship-It, it would go and get an image of a squirrel from the internet and then post it in the chat tool. And it had been 2 or 3 months since our last Ship-It day, so there had been no squirrels to be seen for ages. Until Julie said, I'll give you some photos of the Ship-It day, and then squirrel number 1. And then people decided to pile onto this. And I was very, very impressed with their knowledge of vocabulary and grammar to find other ways of triggering this squirrel, because apparently there's anything that has Ship-It in the word will trigger the bot. So someone realized that you could make some kind of sentence with apprenticeship, something in there, and it just kept going and going and going. 30 minutes later, there was a whole lot of squirrels and still no photos that would allow me to talk about this, but I thought, well, I'll just talk to the squirrels. And yeah. I'm pretty sure every squirrel image on the internet now exists in our group chat tool. But this is one of the examples of something that Julie, who's a happiness engineer in Wellington, has been able to make happen. And Julie and I talk a lot about how she doesn't monopolize these things happening because of her, but just is the continual catalyst to continue to make them happen. And this is a celebration for some of our developers that reached a 7-year tenure. Really important to us not only to celebrate, their achievements in the organization, but, value the input that they have. Like, the organization looks very different now to when they joined, but they contribute huge amounts to our culture and huge amounts to our technical leadership. And so it ended up being a big dress-up thing. I wasn't able to attend, but I was very entertained looking at the photos in preparation for this talk. So we had Rowena and Simon. Simon has the Nerf weapons. Rowena has the scepter and the crown. We have the throne in the background, and we had 2 kind of royal guard dogs that were brought into the office, including Bernie from Bernie's Cafe. He came into the office, and another dog from someone's dog. We had people dressed as court jesters. And there are multiple examples like this of just the kind of quirkiness that people value. But it's far more than that. If you find the right people, they actually do a lot of the important kind of caring for people work around the office. So sensing when people are feeling frustrated or uncomfortable or there's something going on in their personal life that we need to know, they detect that and manage that far more effectively than any line manager, because you can actually seek out and create space for people that genuinely care and are good at this stuff, that exhibit high levels of empathy and EQ and are passionate about this stuff. I don't know how you would advertise for one of these things, but it's been successful enough that we're looking for more of them. And our biggest challenge is that it's a complete personality hire. But how do you screen for that? I don't know, but the learning here was that investing in this deliberately pays itself back big time. It might be really, really hard to sell to someone that has a budget that you need a happiness engineer, but I'll tell you what, that ROI is, I don't even know how you quantify it, but it's pretty big. So I thought I'd share that. Oh, my tea wrapped. All right. If anyone takes photos of that, please don't. It doesn't need to go on Twitter. Does anyone's company do annual engagements? Does anyone's companies do engagement surveys? How many of them are annual? Keep your hands up if they're annual. What the fuck? So not all of this is things that Xero does well. There's some plenty of stuff that we do that's stupid, right? And this is one of them. The irony of our annual engagement survey is that it's called Have Your Say. Only once a year. It's horrible. It's 45 minutes, and the last thing that I want to do, like, love giving feedback. 45 minutes of sitting on this shitty survey, ticking boxes, is not a pleasant thing. And if you talk to anyone that's doing it, they agree, right? But that's not where the madness ends. The madness ends that madness keeps going, because once people fill out this survey, if they even do, because they have to do the 45 minutes of box checking, it then gets sent to some corporate to prepare a report. And that takes 2 to 3 months. And so you get this PDF back 2 to 3 months later, right, with a lot of these charts. And if you want to cut the data a different way, it goes back to the corporate, and they charge you for that, your own data that your employees gave you, to rehash it, right? I honestly don't know the value of these things, given that the feedback that you give in October, November probably is no use in February, March when you get the report. Completely broken, and I don't know why we keep doing it. Fortunately and mercifully, Xero has just gotten rid of annual performance feedback, because that was a shit process as well. You know, in March, suddenly everyone stops to do a whole lot of performance feedback all at the same time over a whole year. Madness. We just stopped it. I'm encouraged, though, that this notion of annual engagement surveys, I think, is starting to reform, because surely it works something, or should work something like this. It's a if you're interested in employee engagement, let's be interested in it all the time. And let's actually see how we can make a difference to this and make it an ongoing conversation. Okay, you guys are pissed off about this. This isn't working very well. Well, we know that at a relevant period of time, and let's make a change and then figure out, has that made things better? Surely annual engagement surveys should work more like this, right? Where you measure things in days or even weeks, but I'll question whether or not you can do it sooner. There is some technologies that are starting to make progress on this problem, but I don't think anyone's nailed it. And I've been warned, and we've all been warned, that if you're a presenter, you shouldn't do any kind of pitch for longer than 1 minute. I'm not making a pitch about Xero, I'm making a pitch about an idea. Anyone that also agrees that this is broken and it needs to be fixed, come and talk to me. Because I've got some ideas on what we can do to make it better, and I would love to find some organizations that agree that there's a better way and prepared to try something. So I'm the guy in the Xero t-shirt. I'm the only one, so it should be easy to find. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time having a bit of a rant about something that we do that's stupid. This is my bullet point slides. When Lisa said, you know, bullet points are bullshit, I thought, oh God. Fortunately, it's right at the end. So really what I want you guys to think about is, you know, in my opinion, culture is the biggest contributor to effectiveness that you have, and so you need to invest in it. If you're not talking about it as a company, if you're not deliberately spending time on it, don't think that you're going to get the right results, right? Because you have to work on anything that's important. And don't leave it up to HR. Don't kind of talk to your HR to say, well, you've really got to work on culture, right? How can you solve this for me? No, it's your problem to solve, and you're in the best spot to solve it. Look at incentives, because there is plenty of research around incentives that don't work for talented people. And I think we'd all like to think that our work requires that small amount of cognitive ability, rather than just, I don't know, pressing on some kind of manufacturing, you know, machine. Solve as few problems as you can as management, because it'll delay the onset of grey hair. It's a great way to solve the problems in a better way than you can yourself, and it engages your employees. It just works, right? It's strange, but it works, and I've seen that, so I'm a complete convert. And lastly, in my big rant, you wouldn't do a retro yearly, so don't do engagement surveys. Start reinventing that, and anyone that wants to reinvent it, come and talk to me. And the last thing that I want you guys to think about is, do you believe that this is true? That organizations have that kind of 10 times outperforming others? Where are you on this diagram? And what are you going to do about it? I don't know where Xero is on this diagram, but we do have conversations internally that if we solve some of the things that are holding us up, we believe that we can be twice as effective. So maybe that indicates that we're somewhere around the median. So, I've got plenty of time, and I deliberately left plenty of time for questions.
Who's got a quick? Oh, right in the middle there. That's going to be challenging.
Right, I'll shut it out. With the peer reward system, obviously nothing in life is perfect. It could inspire a culture of heroics and cowboyism. It could inspire bartering. I'm of two minds, and there's a fairness side that says it may not be fair, but there's also a natural forces fair side that says, well, actually, maybe that's telling you something about your organization. What are, as you guys have explored that topic, have you talked about the downsides or the
Here we have, and unfortunately I don't have for you our own case study yet, but we are working on it, so we are going to run a pilot. And one of the things that we're going to throw out there for our experiment is, here are the risks that we're concerned about, and we want to see if those risks are real or just theoretical. And then we want to engineer how our implementation of that bonus system works based on mitigating those risks. So unfortunately, I can't really empirically answer your question. But my gut tells me that those problems are solvable, and there seems to be enough case studies out there that people seem to have solved at least most of those problems because they want to keep doing it.
Here's a statement in disguise. I did that some years ago where people, with my team, I allowed them to trade tokens with each other for recognition, and another manager came to me and complained and said they're all getting together and doing deals to trade. And I said, fantastic, look at the teaming between the...
Yeah, so the gaming of the system is something that we thought about. And we're a technology company. We're actually pretty good at detecting fraud in financial systems. So if people have got pledging like, kind of the mafia pledging, where it's basically scratch your back, that's actually really easy to detect. My theory will be that will be really easy to detect. And so long as it's genuine feedback, right? So if it's just, I'm just going to give you my 1,000 and you're going to give mine back, or any kind of like wine box kind of inquiry style arrangement, that's not genuine feedback, and I think it probably undermines a lot of the benefit that you're trying to get out of that. But if it is genuinely they've got feedback amongst their group that they're working with, that's fantastic, as long as it's not just kind of shifting financial reward around and it suddenly is evenly distributed amongst certain people.
In your last slide, you were measuring engagement, and you had, that one. So happiness on the vertical index. Is happiness the same thing as engagement? And is engagement the same thing as happiness?
No, I honestly just went on Google Images and tried to find something that looked like a graph that I could steal. There is some, let's talk afterwards, because there's definitely more to it than just a happiness score to actually have useful information about engagement. You need to know a lot more than that.
Could you pass the microphone behind you?
Hello, I'm really interested in your self-managing pods. How do you manage scarce resources amongst the pods? So sharing things like an expert on a really niche thing, something that guilds and stuff has tried to tackle before. And
there's no really one answer to that. Honestly, a lot of the backlog that we do doesn't require really, really niche resources. It tends to be more of an exception rather than a rule for us. And I can't think of any kind of answer that we've come up with other than, shit, we've got a dependency, what are we going to do about it? Where do we get these skills? Is it an opportunity to hire someone, or is that not the right answer? Beg, borrow, and steal, try to skill someone up, or have there's a whole range of things that I think teams have done. When you're looking at 50 to 60 pods, sometimes it's quite difficult for me to kind of see all of those things happening. So unfortunately, I don't think I've got a great answer.
Any other questions? Oh, here we go.
Does Xero have team leads, or are they obsolete? And if you do have them, what do they do?
I could spend 30 minutes talking about this. So we've learnt a lot about how line management plays in a kind of self-organizing and cross-functional model. We have tried the team lead model. We still have the team lead model. it runs along discipline lines. So it kind of reinforces chapters or guilds, maybe. More the chapters, I think. What we're finding is that it's sucking up more time than we would like from our technical leaders, because it seems to be that people management expands to fill available space. Especially as you get more people doing it, they talk more and they come up with more ideas, and it grows bigger and bigger and bigger. And so some of our technical leaders, and it's great big flashing red times up on the screen, so some of our technical leaders have started to think about, well, the happiness engineer role and this problem that we've got, are they different ends of the same problem? Can we actually get specialists in that are kind of part of the team and can do a lot of the HRE coaching, management, happiness, and we as technical leaders focus on technical coaching? Watch this space, because we're having a really good debate internally amongst our teams about how we solve that, because our current paradigm is not working for us. It's sapping more and more time away from people that want to be doing technical stuff.
Yep, so I guess maybe this is the last question, which is, I feel like with the development side of scaling, I've seen that being solved in other organizations. It seems like with the pods, you've got that fairly solved. But where I often see struggles in organizations is with scaling like product ownership or product management and finding people who understand and can express that well. So I'm wondering, what have you guys done to solve that problem?
Yeah, so we, in the Auckland office, we have lots of debates about the delineation between product management and product ownership. What seems to naturally happen is that if we're really clear on our strategy about what user experiences we're trying to deliver and what problems we're trying to solve for our customers, we tend to get people that start to own or specialize in that problem. And so then it kind of scales out like that, right? Is that you need as many people as you have problems that you want to persistently invest in solving. And where we struggle, I think, is the kind of non-software aspects of that, right? So there's time taken up from, marketing activities and working with go-to-market stakeholders and briefing sales team and attending Xerocons and traveling to roadshows and things like that. And one of the things that we're trying to do at the moment is we always seem to never have quite enough time to get as far ahead in the backlog as what we want. And what we're trying to do is do kind of like a time and motion study. Like, where is our time going? Or what are our time saps? And maybe it is that we don't need more product owners or more product managers. We actually need more product marketing people to work really closely with our team to help us with some of the marketing activities. And that's what we're trying to discover is we know we don't have enough time in that competency, but we don't think it's because we don't have enough skills that can grow in the backlog. We think it's other things that are sapping all that time. So I don't know if that answered your question though. So.
Cool, all right. Any other final question? Cool, okay. Bradley, I'd just like to say thank you very much. You're not alone with this. I actually started a role maybe 8 weeks ago, and about 4 weeks ago I went to the HR manager and I actually gave her that HBR magazine, How to Blow Up HR or Time to Blow Up HR. I'll let you know how it goes, but it's all right at the moment. She took it really well. Everyone, sorry? That was a balloon, wasn't it? Yes, using Lisa and Michael's terminology, that was floating a balloon, I suppose. Everyone, it's lunch now, and then we've got a fantastic speech or presentation at 2 o'clock. So thank you very much to Bradley, and have a great lunch.
Thanks.